You'd think that by now I would know to expect the unexpected from Jesus. I've been traveling with him long enough, and I hate to say it, but one miraculous healing, pretty much like all the rest. Even something as amazing as multiplying lunch right in front of us really only shocks you the first time, and after that, it's old hat. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great for that wow factor, and the newbies love it. But not so much surprises me anymore. Except for the day of the fish and the coin. Yeah, that one surprised me a bit. Jesus and the gang of us had just arrived in Capernaum, and we were looking forward to having a rest from all of the traveling and preaching that we'd been doing. We'd been busy, and I could tell that Jesus was tired. More than just tired, I think he was weary. He'd been talking a lot about his death lately, and I think he knew that he didn't have much longer to share his message with the world. And so he'd been burning the candle at both ends, and that meant the rest of us had too. Anyway, we had just arrived at Capernaum and everyone had dispersed. James and John had gone home to see their father, and they'd taken a few of the others as house guests. The rest of us were going to crash at Peter's place. So after going in and saying hello to Peter's mother-in-law and dropping our things, Peter and I decided to go into town to grab a few necessities while the others rested. On our way home, we walked by the guys who were collecting the temple tax. Now, I have to say something here. I know that in most of these stories, the tax collectors tend to get a bit of a bad rap. And that's fair for the Roman imposed taxes because no one likes paying those. But this was different. This was for the temple tax, and we were quite happy to contribute. Each year, every man who is 20 years or older contributes to the temple to help buy the little things that the temple needs throughout the year. Things like salt and wood and flour, those sorts of things. When we saw the tax collectors, Peter said that if he'd known that they'd be there, he would have brought some extra coins so we could pay them. But as it was, we'd only brought enough for the necessities we needed, so he'd come back later in the afternoon. But as we got closer, one of the tax collectors obviously recognized Peter, who had been a prominent businessman in Capernaum before he left to follow Jesus, had a great fishing company. And the tax collector came over to us to ask for our taxes. I was surprised by the accusation I heard in his voice when he said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" It was as if he thought that we would try to avoid paying it. And quite honestly, I was offended and didn't like his tone. I was a little afraid for Peter at this point because he's a little more quick-tempered than the rest of us. And how do I say this nicely? He's a little less polite than the rest of us too. Thought he might go off on this poor tax collector. But to his credit, he didn't. He just said simply, "Yes, he does." Kept on walking. Tax collector followed along behind us, trying to bait us, but Peter kept his mouth shut, and so I followed his lead. When we got home, Peter finally opened his mouth to tell Jesus about the encounter, but Jesus stopped him before he could even get a word out. Ignoring the tax collector, who was hovering on the doorstep trying to decide whether he should invite himself into the house and ask again for the taxes, Jesus said, "Great, guys, you're home. We're having a discussion about taxes. What do you think, Peter? From whom do the kings of the earth take toll or tribute? From others or from their children?" I couldn't believe it. Seriously, this was the discussion we'd just been having, and here they were having it when we got home. Either Jesus was a mind reader, or he was really quick on his feet when he saw our tag along hanging out by the door. Honestly, it was probably a bit of both. But Peter wasn't quite so surprised, and he said very quickly, "Well, others, of course. No king would tax their own children." Oh, come on, I thought. Seriously, you're going to do this, Jesus? We had just been telling the tax collector that we would be happy to pay the tax, And here was Jesus about to say that he was exempt because the temple was his father's house. Mary had told us that story. You remember the one about him being in the temple when he was 12 and claiming it was his dad's house? Yeah, I didn't see this ending well for him or for us. But to my surprise, Jesus did make the argument that he didn't have to pay the tax, but he also said that he still should and would. And then he told Peter to go fishing. Instead of having Judas, our treasurer, pull the coins from our common purse, he told Peter to go and throw a line into the lake, and the first fish that came up would have a coin big enough for both of their taxes. I couldn't believe it when it happened. I honestly couldn't believe it. I should have expected the unexpected from Jesus, but I just couldn't. And from that day on, I've thought of that and all the different lessons that Jesus taught me, even if he didn't know he was teaching them. The first was exactly that. Expect the unexpected from Jesus, because I'd gotten so used to his miracles that they dulled my sense of wonder. This was exactly what I needed to shake me out of my complacency, to make me amazed by Jesus again. Second thing I learned that day was that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Jesus made it very, very clear to us that day that he had the right to refuse to pay the temple tax. But he also made it clear that sometimes the greater good outweighs our individual rights. And so he paid that tax happily. And the third thing I learned was that God provides. Now, I'm not saying God is going to start paying everyone's taxes. That was a one-time deal even for us. But when we have faith, God does provide for our needs. Sometimes that's the tangible things, like when Jesus taught us that we should pray by saying and asking God to give us this day our daily bread. Other times it's the more intangible things that we need, like forgiveness or peace. I don't know about you, but sometimes I am so caught up in wondering why God doesn't give me the things that I think I need, that I forget that God's already given us the greatest gifts of all, life itself, and the earth, which makes that life possible. This was a good reminder of that. I think I should probably get going. I think I see the guys down the shore there. I think they're getting ready to go fishing, but feel free to keep passing this story along. I know it's not one of the more famous ones or really a big splashy miracle, but it taught me a lot that day. And I have to admit, it gave me a good laugh when Peter pulled that fish out of the lake, and the look on his face when it had a coin in it, it was just perfect. I hope that it gives you a good laugh too, and that this story teaches you something about Jesus. That's the great thing about him, is he's teaching us all the time without even knowing it. Tell my story to the world. Have fun.